Thank you for tuning in. My name is Marshall Rosario, who is a health and safety practitioner for over 30 years. Over the last few years, I've been focusing more on mental health, which is an acute problem worldwide, and indeed it's getting worse year on year. This brief is in two parts. Hopefully, you have listened to part one, where I've tried to differentiate between pleasure and happiness. Sometimes, in the pursuit of happiness, we tread on or seek pleasurable things in life, which may lead us to poor mental health. This part two briefly looks at the happiness hormone serotonin. I then will compare this with the pleasure hormone dopamine, which is what leads us to deeper waters. However, I realize that a topic on serotonin or dopamine will draw less attention. I have now titled it as Too Much Porn Can Make Our Brains Shrink. Huh. I'm sure that will get some of the blokes interested. Not to miss out on others, I've also a subtitle, Too Much Pleasure Leads to Increase in Our Tolerance, Addiction, and even death of our brain cell. Hopefully, that is what drew you into this talk. Just like human communication, to send messages within the body, neurotransmitters are deployed. These are chemical messengers that carry messages between nerve cells, which are called neurons. This could be happening in the brain, a muscle, or a gland cell. These hormones are so important because they influence everything from our mood swing to involuntary movements. But neurons need to communicate effectively, not bludgeoned or bombarded with messages, which tend to happen with pleasurable stimulation. When hormones are continuously firing, it will exhaust and die. This is exactly what happens with the pleasure hormone dopamine. Neurotransmitters mainly act in two ways. Excitatory in the action, which happen with the pleasure hormone dopamine. The other type is inhibitory. The happiness hormone serotonin is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. This means it inhibits or hinders the neuron to contentment, meaning neurons are satisfied with the message and produce a relaxing like effect. As the message is effective, there is no need for more neurons to fire for further action. Serotonin is so important as it helps regulate mood, appetite, blood clotting, even SAD or the seasonal affect disorder. Research indicates that SAD is linked to lower level of serotonin and thus affects sleep and body, the circadian rhythm. So we need a lot of serotonin. In the previous part one of this talk, we looked at some of the activities which we can do to increase serotonin. Many activities, including those which I have abbreviated to MELINK, MELINK, which is actually taken from the NEBOSH course, Working with Wellbeing. In contrast, excitatory neurotransmitters means they excite or stimulate the next neuron and target cell to take action. The pleasure hormone dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter and is associated with reward. Dopamine creates a desire to repeat whatever activities we are doing for more inducement or reward. Recreational drugs, for example, are pleasurable because it affects the reward pathway in the brain. As mentioned earlier, neurons need to communicate, not bombarded as happened with chronic stimulation from pleasurable activities or substances. When neurons are continuously firing, it will exhaust and die. Chronic exciting of neuron results in neuron death. However, neurons has a fail-safe mechanism in order not to be overwhelmed. It downregulates the dopamine receptor. So what happens here is, as the neurons are firing and firing, the blunting or the muffing effect causes the receptors to downplay. As the hormones are not getting through, the receptors are craving for more and more dopamine to get through. Consequently, dopamine leads to the increase in tolerance by firing more and more receptors while they are being downplayed. As this happens, neurons start to die, and this is what we call addiction. So once again, guys, excess dopamine can lead to addiction, which takes away the present and the future happiness. And the other thing is that dopamine downregulates or squashes the happiness hormone serotonin, meaning the more pleasure we seek, the more unhappy we get. Let us now see how drugs like cocaine works in the brain. In the normal communication process, dopamine is released by a neuron into the synapse, i.e. the space between the neurons, where it binds to dopamine receptors, which is highlighted in pink. Normally, dopamine is then recycled back into the transmitting neurons by a specialized protein called dopamine transporter, which you can see circled in the picture. However, neurons has a fail-safe mechanism to avoid getting overwhelmed. It downregulates the dopamine receptor and blocks the normal recycling process. This results in a buildup of dopamine in the synapse, which contribute to the pleasurable effect of cocaine. As the level of dopamine in the synaptic gap keeps building and building, the number of dopamine receptors start decreasing as the dopamine reward pathway is blocked in response to the excess of dopamine. This means larger doses of cocaine are needed to achieve the original pleasure. In another word, the neuron get desensitized. Without cocaine in the system, the brain reward pathway don't work properly, leading to unhappiness and more craving, basically addiction. This reward pathway, which we covered earlier, does not just happen with drugs like cocaine. It happens with all type of pleasurable stimuli. Just as how drugs like cocaine affects downplaying and increase our tolerance, leading to addiction, some of the pleasurable activities such as food, sex, and many drug abuse does the same. In conclusion, we need to train and free our mind from the compulsion of thinking too much and craving for short-term pleasures. We saw the difference between pleasures and happiness in part 1 of my talk. I go so far as to say, do not have habits and rituals. Why do you need to have a drink every weekend? Why not be flexible and have it on another day instead? Or refrain on certain weekends? Why not take an alternative route or mode of travel to work? The more we are able to seek a variety of happiness through such activities that I mentioned earlier in MELINK, then the less there is a need to indulge in short-term pleasures, which we saw can lead to addiction and mental health. Thank you all for listening to this short talk. I hope it has helped you, and do look out for each other. Please contact us if your organization require to plan a mental health or well-being intervention program, which is covered in the NEBOSH Working with Wellbeing course.